Welcome to the Indie Author Method, where we share insights from authors for you on your writing journey. On the weekends, when you have more time and space in your day, we sit down with another author to discuss their processes and what they can share with you. This episode is brought to you by Monk Manual. Monk Manual, at its core, is a 90-day productivity system, but it's much more than that. Monk Manual as a company is on a mission to fix modern productivity and help people live fuller lives. Inspired by the wisdom of monks and rooted in psychology, they designed practical tools for peaceful being and purposeful doing. They were so gracious to partner with the Indie Author Method, and you can check out their products, including the 90-day planner that I personally use, at their website, monkmanual.com. Be sure to use promo code Andrew J. Brandt at checkout for 15% off your order. That's all one word, promo code Andrew J. Brandt at monkmanual.com. Now, on to the interview. Today, I am so excited to talk with my friend Andrew Van Wey, whose latest release, By the Light of Dead Stars, released last year, and he just announced Tides of Darkness, the second book in his series, out later this year. Andrew, thanks for joining me today, man.
Thanks for having me back, Andrew. Team Andrews unite.
It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Despite how often your books make me gag, I think it was Head Like a Hole that I had to read at like an arm's length, man.
Yeah, for sure. That one had some interesting body horror in it.
Had some teeth to it.
It did. And some tentacles as well.
I was going to focus on By the Light of Dead Stars, which I read earlier this year. As an arc, by the way, thank you. And but you just announced the title Tides of Darkness, the second book in the series, and did a book cover announcement for that. Today we're recording on July 26th. So, man, let's get into both of these. Tell us about this series.
So yeah, Tides of Darkness is the second book in the Beyond the Lost Coast series. I kind of say it's if you had cosmic horror meets coming of age. It's got a little bit of Stranger Things. It's got a little bit of Stephen King's It. It's got a little bit of mystery and small town secrets. It also is sort of a metaphor for everything that our country is too. We've got these towns and cities that are built on history that stretches back thousands of years, of which we often know very little about. Mm-hmm. And so that's what this series is ultimately exploring, is this town of Greywood Bay. What is it really? It sits at the edge of the Lost Coast, which is a region of California that is mythical and mystical. It was settled by lots of indigenous people. Pioneers were out there. There was fur trapping, but it's always been a region that's been very difficult to get to and very difficult to navigate. They even tried to build highways out to this region, and the terrain is just too rocky. So it's earned the name the Lost Coast because of shipwrecks, because people got lost out there, and just because it's a region of California at the very northern edge between Oregon and about 2/3 of the way up this area called Mendocino, that is just always held my imagination. And so I'm going to get a romp all around those fertile grounds with this book and these books.
It reminded me a lot of whenever I was reading By the Light of this kind of funny quote that I put on Facebook one time. We were dealing with like tornadoes and extreme heat, all this weird weather stuff. And I said, boy, you would think that this country was built on ancient Indian burial grounds.
Yeah, you would think, right? So I think they even talk about that in the first book at some point, that everything, if you go back far enough, there's a lot of burial grounds here.
Yeah. You had mentioned that these have that flavor that Stephen King, your Stranger Things, these are pieces of pop culture that I find flavor my own writing as well. Even when I'm not writing horror, if I'm writing coming of age or young adult, I can't help but notice I've got that R.L. Stine and Stephen King flavor to it. So who are some of your biggest literary influences, and how have they impacted your writing?
Well, you named two of them right there, R.L. Stine and Stephen King. I mean, I grew up in the late 80s and early 90s, and the impact of Goosebumps, as well as, the kids on bike genre, where there's kids that are out discovering things and fighting them on their own. Boy's Life was another one. So that combined with, I think, obviously H.P. Lovecraft, Clive Barker's books always explore the really otherworldly and the fantastical. Um, and then, yeah, of course, recent things like Stranger Things. I guess it is going to be a TV series as well. They're
All
doing
right.
some TV series that's exploring dairy. So all of these things, of course, are inescapable. It's like a gravity well. You can't not acknowledge that it's there. I hope that I'm putting my own unique spin on it by bringing a little bit of more of a California perspective. These are towns and cities that are also struggling with the housing crisis. A lot of people want to live here. Affordability is an issue. They're running up against generational wealth that's entrenched and doesn't like new people moving into these areas. So there's also a lot of problems that I think books like that haven't explored that I'm looking forward to exploring with this series.
One thing that I admire your writing. I said again, even if I have to read it, at arm's length because of some of the tentacle body horror of like Head Like a Hole, is you are so good at bringing in some of those fantastical elements. When I did Picture Unavailable, I wanted to write an 80s style kids on bikes book, but then reading like Head Like a Hole, which was set in the 90s, it had that flavor too. And you're able to bring in, like you said, that HP Lovecraft stuff, the fantastical elements that my imagination just, I'm capped for some reason. And sort of read what you're doing, blowing that imagination wide open, man. I love it. Talked about your literary influences. Let's talk about your writing process itself. Do you have any particular rituals or habits that you follow?
I wish I could tell you that there was a 5-step pattern for success that I follow, but every book is its own battle. And I feel like every year is its own battle as well. And I've kind of gotten to the point in my career where I'm more comfortable accepting the chaos than I probably was a few years ago. For example, in 2022, I wrote 3 books. In 2023, I'm barely able to write 1 book because this book is so much more complicated than the other books that I wrote. So it has a lot more moving pieces. It's the second book in a series. It's also setting up the third book in the series, which I'll be starting and working on later this year. So I wish I could tell you that I had a process that I follow. The most important thing is just to treat it like a job and to get your ass in the chair every single day and put words down. It doesn't matter how many words there are. Some days it's just editing commas and moving it around for flow and reading it out loud. But every single day, 7 days out of the week, I'm working.
Robert Greene, who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, talked about that. He said that his dedication and his habit have been more important than the times of just extreme inspiration. He said he would trade away all the inspiration if he could always keep to his habit.
I absolutely believe in that. I think Stephen King talked about his muse being this little goblin that chews on a cigar and lives in the basement. It's this little blue collar gremlin thing. It's not this beautiful, fairy that comes through the window and sprinkles pixie dust on your ideas. It's something that's crude and awful, but you have to just approach it day by day.
Your answer to that question actually dovetails perfectly into my next one, because I wanted to ask you about some of your challenges of your writing process. And you said that 2023 you were able to just get 1 book. I've been following you for a few years now, and you've always been one of the more prolific indie authors that I know. What was the cause, do you think, of those challenges, or why you had to slow down a little bit on this, and how did you overcome those challenges?
So we got a dog this year. Our dog died last year. Our previous dog died in 2022. And we sort of had this delayed grief that we didn't really kind of acknowledge until probably the holidays had passed. I was in the middle of finishing By the Light of Dead Stars, which was a book about grief as well, and death and all sorts of things in there. So yeah, it was wonderful that those themes harmonized with my real life as well. Yeah. But I think that there was a lot of emotional unpacking that I needed to do because we don't have kids. Our dog is our child, quote unquote. So that's what we put a lot of our energy into. and her death was really unexpected. So there was that event in life. And then there was the welcoming of a new puppy into our life about 4 months later, which, if you've ever had a dog, a puppy is an experience in and of itself.
Little
You are lucky if your productivity is 25% of
it's
what
a
it
toddler
is.
with double the legs.
It's a toddler, yeah, exactly. Double legs, and it's always trying to kill itself. And you can put a toddler on its back for the most part, and they can't really go. I mean, toddlers, they'll wander around.
Yep.
But the first year, my nephews and nieces were essentially stationary. They were just
Yeah.
on their back. You can't do that with a
Yeah.
puppy. Our puppy's now 7.5 months old and 73 pounds. He's a
Yeah.
big boy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that takes up a lot of energy. And I just found that, real life has a way of intruding on your writing. Writing is one of those things that when you're doing it, sometimes it doesn't look like you're doing it. Sometimes you're doing the dishes. Sometimes you're walking around. Sometimes you're just building up
Mhm.
that creative momentum to actually sit at the desk and put the words. But before you've got those words, you've got to massage the idea. You've got to explore it. You've got to turn it around. And when you're chasing, a dog that decided to eat an electrical cord around your yard and keeping it from killing itself,
Yeah.
the creativity, the momentum stops and starts a lot. So I would say that was probably a very boring answer, but
No, not at
real
all.
life can intrude in things.
Yeah. I go on a lot of walks, to ruminate and
Yeah.
massage, the gray matter, get stuff out of there. I know you're a big mountain biker. Are you still riding the bike? Are you still
I do,
active?
yeah.
Yeah.
I need to ride it a little bit more because I put on some weight since we've had this puppy. Nothing I'll put on some pounds like stress eating. But
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. The bike rides are one of my churches that I go to and attend regularly. Just that 2 hour flow zone that you get into. For me, I mountain bike. And so about 20, 30 minutes into that ride, the endorphins really start going. I try to listen to music that doesn't have a lot of vocals. So I'll be listening to everything from classical to just orchestral, video game music, ambience, things like that. And because there's no words and no lyrics, I really just, my brain starts going. And that's
Yeah.
a time of great preparation. I mean, I've come back from bike rides and jumped immediately to the desk without showering or anything, much to the chagrin of my wife. And those have been some of the best times of my writing. So yeah, I get a lot of thinking done on bike rides.
A lot. Like, I think this is the last time we spoke. I've put on a little bit of weight. I've lost a little bit of hair.
You have, yeah. I like it. It's a good look.
So you were talking about, going back to your books. By the Light of Dead Stars was about grief. And I love that because I had just written a book about grief. Picture Unavailable was about a boy who had lost his father.
Yeah.
And a widow who had lost her husband.
Yep.
The book before that had like a whole was a revenge tale. What is the message or takeaway that you want readers to get out of Tides of Darkness?
Wow, that's a really good question. I would say that grief is a process, not a destination, and that it evolves and it changes. Sometimes we have to face our grief in ways that are a little bit uncomfortable. And sometimes that grief has a massive debt to it, and you don't realize how long it takes for it to surface. Yeah. Denying that grief or denying any sort of debt that there is. This town, for example, Greywood Bay, is built on a debt of horror that has been denied for generations. And Tides of Darkness is going to explore how some of the people in this town accumulated the wealth, how they protected their wealth, what they'll do to keep that wealth from outsiders who they believe, rightfully or wrongly, are encroaching upon that. So I think that one of the major takeaways from Tides of Darkness is that we have to face whatever it is that frightens us, whether it's grief, whether it's the fear of losing control, money, power, any of those things. We need to turn around and acknowledge that they're there. And until we do that, that accrues interest that eventually it's going to be unpayable.
Goodness. If there was anybody who I could study from, the craft of writing, the craft of writing horror novels or storytelling in general, it'd be Stephen King. But if I can't get Stephen King, I want Andrew Van Wey.
Yeah, I'm a wish.com Stephen King. That'll be at the top of my books. I like that.
Wish.com Stephen King. No. Andrew, where can our viewers, where can our listeners find you if they're interested in By the Light of Dead Stars is out now, or want to pre-order perhaps Tides of Darkness?
Sure. All of my stuff can be found on andrewvanwey.com, AndrewVanWey. It's W-E-Y because I'm Dutch. So andrewvanwey.com.
What fountain pen are you using these days?
Oh, wow. I lost one of my favorite fountain pens at the 20 Books conference last fall. So I put in another order for it, but it's coming from Japan and it's going to take them about 6 months to get it to me. So that was previously was a Pilot Custom 823 from Japan that had a special nib that you can only get over at one shop in the world because this guy has been working with these nibs for like 100 years. So it's another one of those. In the meantime, I am doing most of my editing on a Pilot Custom 74. You can tell I like Pilot a lot.
I'm a Lamy guy myself.
I love Lamy as well. Yeah, one of my favorite pens is a Lamy 2000 with a really nice grind. But yeah, Lamys are absolute workhorses. Yeah. They're just a little bit wide for me. I've got a really kind of small hand. Those European nibs tend to be just a little too thick for me.
Yeah, I use a Lamy pen, but I do use Pilot ink.
Yeah, Pilot ink, they make some great stuff. I think I've got some on the back on the shelf behind me right now, actually.
Hey, one more before I let you go. What's the biggest piece of advice you'd give to an aspiring author? I mean, you were just at 20 books, so I'm sure this happened to you while you were there. You know, somebody came up to you and said, like, Andrew Van Wey, like, I want to write books. You know, what's the biggest piece of advice you would give me just starting out? So you, I mean, multiple books in now, you've got tons of wisdom built up over the years.
I don't feel like that, but I'm getting this question a lot these days. I actually had a Facebook post maybe a week or two about how our authors are soliciting advice from me and I don't feel qualified to give it. I think my number one piece of advice just overall is be a nice guy. Don't be an a-hole in everything you do. Yeah. I think that this industry is a lot smaller than we realize. And you meet the same faces at conferences, you interact with writers. You may not think that that writer whose book you trashed is your peer or colleague, or you might not think that that person who you're asking to blurb your book is they're way up here and you're down here. But that gap is actually a lot smaller than people think. And so putting positivity in all your interactions with your readers, with others, is really important. It pays dividends and it just also pushes the genre forward. Horror is a very small genre right now. It's not where it was in the 70s and 80s. That high watermark will probably never be achieved again, but it is a genre that you can have an outside impact on that. So try to put a lot of positivity into all your interactions. You're not competitors, you're peers, you're not enemies, you're colleagues. We're all kind of in this together. And a lot of that positivity really goes a long way. And it honestly makes it easier to work with. I'm at the point where people are asking me for blurbs and I don't have enough time in the day to read all the books that I want to read the blurbs that I'm also being asked to read, and to do these other things that people are now asking of me. And it makes it a little bit easier to say no when someone's a jerk. So it just makes that decision, because I have to say no to some of my friends who I really like because they get me a blurb request and say, this book is publishing in 60 days. Can you read it? And I've got books on my shelf that I'm reading for 6 months from now. So I'm going to have to move those around. If you come at me like an a-hole, it's a lot easier for me to say no and just be like, I'm sorry. So I think positivity is just the number one thing that you can do to help yourself as a writer. The rest of it, you'll learn along the way. The craft of it, the skill, those other things. The positivity has to come from the heart.
Dude, that was the best answer I think I've had so far. I appreciate it. And thank you for taking your time for me today. I mean, you're
my pleasure.
Essentially, helping me out here.
No, this is a blast.
Handing out free content, but I can only do it with the help of other people. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's always fun chatting.
Good seeing you again, Andrew Van Wey. Can you tell us when the next book comes out?
This autumn. That is
Okay.
as close as I will commit to it, because it is an indie. I can move that around a little
That's
bit,
right.
but it will be out later this year.
Yeah, just don't set that pre-sale date on Amazon Kindle too early, right?
I set it for 1 year ahead of time, and I can move it up, but I can't move it down once
That's
I've done
right.
it. So
Very cool. All right, man. Thank you so much.
thank you. It was fun being on this. Cheers.
See ya.